Welcome to our webinar for April. I'm Laura Ellsworth, the Strategic Partnerships and Advocacy Manager with Council for the Homeless, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I'd also like to introduce Shavonna McEwen, the Equity and Advocacy Director for Council for the Homeless. Shavonna will be helping monitor our chat tonight and will be helping me out by sharing some links and helping with our Q&A. I am excited that you all could join us for this webinar about our national and local approach to serving students who are homeless, how it differs from serving adults who are homeless, and how it impacts racial equity in the ways in which we are able to provide services in our community. And I'm really happy to have a couple of wonderful guests with us tonight who will be sharing their work, insights, and expertise with all of you. So, as always, I have a few reminders for you as we get started. Again, the only people that you'll see and hear tonight are the panelists, so relax, you're not on camera. Please post any questions that you may have in the chat. And this webinar will be recorded and shared afterward on our website. And lastly, as you close out your webinar tonight, there will be a survey, a short survey that will appear in your browser, and please do fill that out. It really does help us with our planning and evaluation of our webinars that we do. So here's a quick rundown of our agenda for tonight. I'm going to dive a bit into the history of the McKinney-Vento Act and its subsequent amendments. And I'm also going to cover the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's HUD definition of homelessness and how that impacts service delivery for people experiencing homelessness of all ages. I'll cover some of the data and demographics for school-aged children experiencing homelessness. And then we'll move into our panel discussion where we will learn more about what is being done in our local schools to serve children experiencing homelessness and how that impacts racial equity, as well as challenges and opportunities that come with it. We'll also do some Q&A, and as always, I'll end our time together with some calls to action. So, in the early 80s, the initial responses to widespread and increasing homelessness were primarily local. Homelessness was viewed as a problem that did not require federal intervention. And in the years that followed, advocates around the country demanded that the federal government acknowledge homelessness as a national problem that required a national response. So with this goal in mind, the Homeless Persons Survival Act was introduced in both houses of Congress in 1986. And this act contained emergency relief measures, preventative measures, and long-term solutions to homelessness. However, only very small pieces of this proposal were initially enacted into law. The first law that was passed removed permanent address requirements and other barriers to existing programs such as supplemental security income, aid to families with dependent children, veterans benefits, food stamps, and Medicaid. Also in 1986, the Homeless Housing Act was adopted. And this legislation created the Emergency Shelter Grant Program and a Transitional Housing Demonstration Program. And both programs were administered by HUD. So focus on shelter. Keep in mind that that was the first thing in 1986. So in late 1986, legislation creating emergency relief provisions for shelter, food, mobile health care, and transitional housing was introduced. And after an intensive advocacy campaign, and hopefully those of you who have attended our advocacy webinars can appreciate this, large bipartisan majorities in both houses of Congress passed the legislation in 1987. And after the death of its chief Republican sponsor, Representative Stuart McKinney of Connecticut, the act was named the Stuart B. McKinney Homeless Assistance Act, and it was signed into law on July 22nd, 1987. And thus, the first comprehensive federal response to homelessness was born. I feel like if we were in the room together, maybe there would be some soft applause. So, it created 15 programs that provided a spectrum of services for people experiencing homelessness, including emergency shelter, transitional housing, job training, primary health care, education, and some permanent housing. And so Over the years, the act has been reauthorized several times. It also established what is now known as the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness, which is the only federal agency with the sole mission of preventing and ending homelessness in America. It's called the USICH, and it coordinates 19 federal member agencies, state and local governments, and the private sector to create partnerships, to use resources in the most efficient and effective ways, and to implement evidence-based best practices. The original McKinney Act actually provided little protection for children experiencing homelessness in the area of public education. And as a result, the state of Illinois passed the Illinois Education for Homeless Children Act, which was drafted by Joseph Clary, who was an attorney and advocate for the Illinois Coalition to End Homelessness. And Clary then worked with the national advocates, again, that advocacy piece, to ensure that the protections afforded to children who are homeless by the Illinois statute were incorporated into the federal McKinney Act. And at that point, the McKinney-Vento Act was amended to become the McKinney-Vento Act. On October 30th, in the year 2000, President Bill Clinton renamed the legislation the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act after the death of Representative Bruce Vento, a leading supporter of the act since its original passage in 1987. And so that amended act uses the Illinois statute in defining homeless children as individuals who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. It ensured that local school districts must provide transportation to and from school, allowing children to attend their school of origin, regardless of what district the family resides in, while accessing emergency shelter, perhaps in another part of town. And it created school, family, and community resource liaisons. And these things are all crucial. And so let's dig into why. So as I mentioned, the McKinney-Vento Act defines specific rights for students and unaccompanied youth experiencing homelessness. And here are just a few of them. And as you look at this list and think about how this better serves students by removing barriers to access, it's easy to imagine replacing some of these elements to things that apply to adults seeking access to programs and services, and see maybe just how much better served they might be. In 2009, President Obama signed into law a bill to reauthorize HUD's McKinney-Vento homeless assistance programs. And a number of the changes that had been made throughout the years, mostly through annual appropriations processes, because over the years, it just became more and more difficult to get that bipartisan support in both houses of Congress. Most notably, the creation of the Continuum of Care process occurred in 1995. But the HARTH Act in 2009 made numerous changes to HUD's homeless assistance programs, including expanding homelessness prevention, more emphasis on rapid rehousing, especially for families, creating permanent supportive housing for people experiencing chronic homelessness, and allowing rural communities the option of applying under a different set of guidelines that offer more flexibility and more assistance with capacity building. And when I say applying, I mean applying for federal funding. And not to bury the lead here, but it also defined homelessness for youth as being doubled up or couch surfing, or staying in a motel using private funds. A lot also happened in regards to funding through the Emergency Shelter Grant Program. Remember, that was the initial program created in 1987. And in 2009, it was renamed to be the Emergency Solutions Grant. So it went from Emergency Shelter Grant to Emergency Solutions Grant. And that signified its shift towards prevention and rehousing as opposed to only focusing on emergency shelter. So suffice it to say, without getting too much into the weeds here, priorities shifted towards prevention and rehousing and rental assistance and stabilization efforts and so on. And so with the HARTH Act came what we commonly refer to now as the McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness, which applies to young children and youth. So I do want to pause here and just note the Housing and Urban Development, the HUD definition of literal homelessness. This is the definition that our homeless crisis response system uses in order for adults to be eligible for housing programs. And so this is adults who are living in a place not meant for human habitation, an emergency shelter, in transitional housing, or are exiting an institution where they temporarily resided, such as jail or a hospital. I'd like to just highlight the part about being an emergency shelter and motels paid for with private funds and transitional housing. What this means is an adult who is in a motel paid for with their own funds, for example, is not considered homeless. And someone who's in emergency shelter or transitional housing is also still considered homeless, as defined by HUD. So even if a community were to put every adult into emergency shelter, that community would still have a homeless population, which has large implications on outcomes and funding. And importantly, in 2009, through the HEARTH Act, the definition on student homelessness was changed to the following. And this is where you really see how the definition of homelessness can impact service delivery and how different it is from the definition of HUD's literal homelessness. So the most stark aspect being that students who are doubled up or couch surfing qualify as homeless. So Building Changes is a nonprofit group that advances equitable responses to homelessness in Washington state with a focus on children, youth, and families and the systems that serve them. They analyze state data for 5 school years in an annual report on students experiencing homelessness in Washington's K-12 public schools. Shavana is going to post a link to this document in the chat in case you'd like to take a closer look at it. And hopefully I sent her the correct link, but you can also look it up on their website and take a look for yourself. So this data set includes the last full academic year before the pandemic and will provide some baseline information on student homelessness in Washington. And the pandemic, of course, has shifted the ways schools approached outreach, learning, testing, and discipline. And we will continue to observe the many ways that COVID-19 has impacted students across the state. But for now, the report identified 6 key findings. Student homelessness in Washington remains high. More than 40,000 students in the state's K-12 public schools experience homelessness. And students of color continue to experience homelessness at a disproportionate rate compared to the overall student population. Rural locations still have the highest per capita rate of student homelessness, while cities have the largest number of students experiencing homelessness. And academic outcomes for students experiencing homelessness remain well below those of students who are housed. And social emotional learning outcomes worsened for students experiencing homelessness compared to their housed peers. And this last one, it was a bit surprising for me, and it is that students who were identified as living in doubled up situations or couch surfing situations had similar academic outcomes as those living in hotels, motels, and shelters, and even those who were living unsheltered. So you'll see as we dig a little bit more into this data, how the McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness impacts service delivery for students of color. In Clark County, the overwhelming majority of students experiencing homelessness are doubled up or couch surfing, 81%. Imagine what would happen if we stopped using the McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness for our community school children. And we know that students of color are far more likely to live doubled up or couch surfing than white students, and that students of color are far more likely to be homeless than their white cohorts. Imagine if we had to limit the definition of homelessness to students like we do adults, and how that would impact our BIPOC community's ability to access services. And here's a look at some Clark County specific data. The largest group of kids experiencing homelessness in Clark County are elementary age students, followed by high school and middle school students. And I'm sure it comes as no surprise that attendance rates and academic performance is greatly reduced among students who are homeless versus their housed counterparts. Homelessness impacts people across different identities and expressions, including race, ethnicity, gender, ability, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, citizenship status, and language. And we recognize that racial disparities cut across all other forms of inequity. Black, Latinx, American Indian, and Alaska Native populations are more likely than other racial or ethnic groups to experience homelessness. And these disparities require us to be explicit and intentional in our work to address inequitable access to housing and services. Holding ourselves accountable for understanding structural inequities, we commit to leveraging our strengths to achieve equitable outcomes and improve experiences within the systems that serve people. Here in Clark County, we have 2 school district partners with offices dedicated to serving students experiencing homelessness, called Family Community Resource Centers. At Council for the Homeless, we have dedicated staff liaisons who work with the school district FCRC staff to serve students and their families who are experiencing homelessness. And I also want to give a huge shout out because we have more than 2 in the county. We actually, all the school districts have an FCRC center and staff. So I want to give a huge shout out to the amazing work being done in Camas and Washougal and Battleground and La Center and Ridgefield. So children and youth who experience homelessness, obviously face many barriers to education, and school can be a source of stability and affirmation and hope during a time of chaos and trauma when a young person loses their housing. Community service providers play a key role in linking homeless children and youth to schools and providing those wraparound services that can bolster their attendance and educational success. So family resource centers and their local liaisons ensure that procedures and outreach activities are in place to identify children and youth experiencing homelessness, and that school staff members understand the homeless definition and the rights of homeless children and youth, and the procedures for enrolling these students immediately and linking them to services. The local liaison also makes sure that parents who are homeless and unaccompanied youth are informed of the educational protections in the law by displaying posters in each school and in community agencies and other locations where families and youth are likely to go. The local liaison reviews a family or youth's circumstances and makes an eligibility determination and helps the children and youth enroll in school and receive services, including tutoring, school supplies, free meals, etc. The local liaison collaborates with community agencies like Council for the Homeless. And this collaboration ranges from providing information and posters to increase awareness and coordinating joint activities to bringing a full range of services to children and youth and their families who are homeless. So now I'm super excited to introduce you to our fabulous guests tonight who are here to talk about their work with students in our community who are experiencing homelessness. Tanisha Harris is a lifelong resident of Vancouver. She's a proud graduate of Clark College and Washington State University, Vancouver. Me too, yay. Tanisha has had 20 years experience of working in the field of multicultural diversity education, advocating for children and families in the foster care system for the YWCA Clark County. She's currently a Hope advocate for the Vancouver School District and advocating for homeless and unaccompanied youth. Tanisha is a Washington State Democrats executive board member, serves as a member of the local Indian Child Welfare Advisory Committee, is a past co-chair of the Evergreen Citizens for Schools, and served on the City of Vancouver Task Force on Council Representation. Tasha Slater is the diversion manager at Council for the Homeless. And in her role, Tasha oversees school-based and rental assistance programs. She works closely with local school districts to connect students to housing resources and oversees staff providing direct support to youth and families experiencing homelessness and housing instability. Tasha has experience working with youth in a variety of roles and is passionate about youth-centered engagement that prioritizes their needs through the diversion approach. So Tanisha, I'll turn it over to you. And I am going to stop sharing my screen for a second and pull up your slides. So welcome, Tanisha, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Lauren. Good evening, everybody. And thank you, everybody who's joined us today. And thank you for everybody
who I think your audio might be just a little quiet, Tanisha. If you don't mind, that gives me a minute to pull yours up too.
Okay. I can speak a little bit louder. Is that better?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, we were having a lot of technical difficulties before, so I'm glad to be here and with you all to talk a little bit about the HOPE program, which stands for Homeless Outreach Promoting Education in the Vancouver School District. I am a HOPE advocate, working with our homeless and unaccompanied youth. I've been doing that this school year, but really and my previous work too, have always been working with children and families. So it's really good to be here tonight. For the invitation, and I know, really appreciate all the information that Laura has provided as a really good basis and foundation for what I'm going to speak about and what Tasha is going to speak about too. Next slide.
Yes, and can everyone see the HOPE presentation here? Is it good? Is that what you see on your screen? Okay, good. All right.
We'll make this work somehow, Laura.
I know we're making it happen. Here we go.
So,
okay.
So in the Vancouver School District, there's 4 of us in the HOPE office. Melissa Newhouse, who is our coordinator and homeless liaison, foster care liaison. Mary Logan, who is our HOPE program liaison clerk, and she's also bilingual, speaking both English and Spanish. And so she has helped us out tremendously this school year and in previous school years as well. And then both myself and Amanda Takish, we are advocates, and we are based at this level. We are represent both Hudson's Bay High School, Fort Vancouver, Skyview, Columbia River, JTC, the Heights program, Soren, Discovery, and Mac Middle School. But a little bit about the Vancouver School District. We currently have 22,000 students. Those 22,000 today, 1,000 of those students have now been identified as being homeless or unhoused. We keep weekly tracks, and I have been told that we are about the last 3 school years higher than we were just 3 years ago. And a lot of that has to do with our FCRCs and the work that we're doing in the HOPE office to identify families and students who are experiencing homelessness or are in transitional housing and our unaccompanied youth. Next slide.
All right. Yeah, and Tanisha, your audio kind of cuts out a little bit. So I'm wondering if maybe try turning off the camera. That might help.
Okay.
Us. Yeah, sometimes that fixes it.
Okay.
Perfect. Yeah.
So what we do at HOPE, we remove the barriers for students and families who are experiencing homelessness. We are the McKinney-Vento liaisons, and so it's all about removing those barriers, so making sure that all of our students obtain an education and graduate from high school. We ensure that basic needs are being met, that the law is being followed, and then we also determine best interest for student success. And we provide trainings and professional school buildings and district office staff. What we don't do, and even though at times we would love to be able to can't, is manage day-to-day transportation, drive buses or set up routes, provide immediate funding for housing and family therapy. There are occasions that we do get funding that we can help assist things, but that has quickly ran out for us. And so we have to do more with less. And so we definitely rely on our community partners like our FCRCs, Council for the Homeless, SHARE, and also the Vancouver Public Schools Foundation as well. And I see the links that are being posted. Thank you. I was going to post those. Thank you, Bonnie, and everybody else for posting those links for us. Next slide.
Okay, there we go.
Laura has already explained McKinney-Vento, and like I said, is all about removing barriers to enrollment, attendance, and success in schools of students experiencing homelessness. And next. So at HOPE, we have our little HOPE house here, and inside HOPE, we have our McKinney-Vento and unaccompanied youth, and we also our liaison system working with our local DCYF. Our partnership is with the FCRCs, who are invaluable. We have a really close working relationship HOPE is district-wide and our FCRCs are school-based. And next. So in this presentation, I'm going to focus on the side of things and our unaccompanied youth. And then at the end, I'm going to touch a little bit about our foster care system. A lot of times when we are meeting with students and we're talking to families, sometimes some people will say, I'm homeless. Other times we use transitional housing, in-between housing, emergency housing. We really get to know our families and our students. So we know what language to use with them that makes them the most comfortable so we can have that working relationship with them. So all of our programs have different names, and so I would encourage wherever school district you have kids or grandkids in, that you take a look at their website, their school district website, what their programs are all about. Next slide. So the rights of McKinney-Vento students. Students have the right to remain attending their school of origin, even if they live out of the boundaries or even out of district boundaries within reason. The district must provide transportation to and from school. Students who are experiencing homelessness or unaccompanied youth have to be enrolled immediately, even without completing their academic records, immunization records, and without requiring proof of residence. And then also have programs and services as any other students. Next slide. Again, how we define homeless: those who lack a fixed, regular, adequate nighttime residence, living in homeless shelters, where there's no electricity or water, living in motels or hotels. Majority of our homeless and unaccompanied youth and families and those who are experiencing housing with family and friends due to financial and economic hardship. And then also we identify those families who have lost their housing due to natural disasters. Just this past week and a half, we've transportation for the students as well too. Next slide. Some of the local shelters that our families live in are Oak Ridge Youth Shelter, Transitional Youth, Open House Ministries, Share Valley Homestead, the WHO. Are you hearing me okay, Laura?
Yeah, it's cutting in and out a bit. I think we're getting most of it. Yeah. Oh, I think you're on mute now.
Can you hear me now, okay?
Yep.
Okay, next slide.
Thanks for bearing with us, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. We also have families who are currently and students living in their cars and vans and safe park locations, living in trailers, and living in tents and campgrounds and parks. So we identify those families and we do our best to connect them with emergency shelters to get them out of the elements. Next slide. And we also have families living in hotels and motels. And certain occasions, we're able to assist in some of those costs, but we do have families who are in hotels and motels. Next slide. and stay with them, because it's not easy asking for help. We all know that. And so when you have family, friends who are opening up their hearts and their homes, we are very grateful for that. And Laura, next slide. The top 5 questions about HOPE that we always get is the qualification process, school of origin, health and educational accommodations, transportation, and unaccompanied youth.
You cut out again, Tanisha.
Okay, next slide.
But luckily your slides are very good, so I think we're getting the gist, yes.
So our qualification process is every school building has a housing questionnaire that families can fill out when they enroll their students. Our unaccompanied youth can also fill out this questionnaire, and then it gets turned into the HOPE office. A lot of times too, we are given referrals by counselors and teachers and community folks about a family or student they feel is maybe is no longer living in their with their parents or their guardians, if something's happened in the household. So we get a lot of referrals, and then we reach out to those students and those families just to kind of verify their living situation, and then we will qualify them. We'll qualify them for the HOPE program. We will inform them of the services that we can provide to them. And that qualification says we document everything. We keep both paper and electronic files. And then we also inform the school. So we inform the school secretary, the enrollment clerks, registrars, the students' counselors, teachers, business clerks as well too, and the FCRC at that school that we have now qualified in their HOPE family. And like I said, we have now identified 1,000 students in the Vancouver School District. Next slide. School of origin. This always is a question that comes by the school of origin, and the school of origin is a school that a youth attended when permanently housed, or a school in which youth was last enrolled. So say that they were attending Hudson's Bay High School and the family lost their housing. Now the students are at Skyview High School. Those students have a right to keep attending Hudson's Bay High School, even if they are in the Skyview school boundaries as well. Next slide. Health and educational accommodations. So as advocates, we work with the families and the schools to make sure that the students are enrolled. Schools are obligated to enroll McKinney-Vento students in schools, and the school nurses will work with our HOPE office to help the student and their families come up to date on any vaccinations. Medical needs, we work with the student and their families to ensure that any medical needs are addressed as soon as possible. Here in the HOPE office, we have documentation that myself and Amanda can provide to dental clinics, hospitals, and any healthcare clinic, showing that our family or student is part of the McKinney-Vento HOPE program and that they need access. Also, our documentations allow Amanda and myself to accompany, especially our unaccompanied youth, to those medical so she was able to work with the hospital staff to to make sure that all the medical needs were being met. So we kind of do it all here in the HOPE office, and making sure that our students' health needs are being met. I also know with immunization, something that we do is that we had a number of our high school students in the HOPE program who wanted to get the COVID vaccination, and we were able to assist them in getting the COVID vaccination, providing the proper documentation. And we worked with our free clinic in Southwest Washington on that too. So again, a great community partner in them. IEPs and any other educational documentations, the schools must keep them, health records, academic records, birth certificates, guardianship papers, and evaluations for special services. Another part of both mine and Amanda's jobs is that we work with our school psychologists and counselors in ensuring that IEP and 504 plans are being followed and that evaluations are done in a timely manner. We state ID and driver's license too. And again, we have documentation through the HOPE program that allows us to do that under McKinney-Vento as well. Next, Laura. Transportation. Transportation is a huge part of our daily responsibility, especially down in the HOPE office with Melissa and Mary. We identify the need if transportation is needed. If transportation is needed within the Vancouver School District, we work with our Vancouver Public Schools Transportation Department. If one of our families or students is living outside of our school district boundaries, we partner with ESD 112 to obtain transportation to schedule a bus. So we have a lot of referrals that get made to both VPS and to ESD. We have transportation available to our students. We also, transportation departments will set up the routes and times and will contact that family as the start dates. We also, in various situations, can provide gas cards to both students and families for transportation needs. And then we also work with Vancouver Cab Company that in some situations, we do have kids who will take a cab to and from school. It's on an as, you know, we always evaluate the family situation and what is in the best interest of that child, that student, and if that is an appropriate form of transportation. And I can tell you that this past school year, we have been tracking our monthly transportation referrals, both to ESD 112, VPS, our gas card request, and also taxi cab. Been at about around 60 in requests in January, and in February we jumped up to like about almost 85 requests. And then we went down a little bit to in the 60s here in March. In April, we probably pushed up around about 65. So even as things have, we're coming out of COVID, we're coming near the end of a school year, the need for transportation referrals is still high, and we will still be working on all those transportation referrals and following up with our transportation partners to make sure that takes place. Next slide.
Yeah, and I have a question really quick. What
Yes.
does LEA stand for? Can I guess?
You can guess.
Is it Liaison Education Advocate?
It's
all the
local
words.
education agency. Yeah.
What is it?
It's a local education agency.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for indulging me. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
It could be other things to different people too. So,
that's right.
One part of mine and Amanda's job is working with our homeless unaccompanied youth. And our definition is young people experiencing homelessness who are not in the physical custody of their parent or guardian. And the student, they meet both the UI definition and the homeless definition. And just like we talked about before, their living situation is like everybody else's. And stories that both Amanda and myself could share about the students that we have worked with, working with our FCRCs. Our students, but I can tell you right now, our students who experiencing homelessness, housing, in between housing, they're very resilient and they have a lot of strength, and they want the same thing as every other student, as all of us. And we are here to help them and guide them And when they come to school, we want to make sure that they are welcomed, that they are seen, that they are heard, and that they know that they are coming to a safe place and that there's people there to support them. Some of the student rights that they have is they'll be made aware of their status as an independent student for FAFSA. We saw actually this year an increased number of our FAFSA for financial aid for college or community college. Amanda and I, we provide letters to the students and also to our Career Center coordinators as well, because they help our students fill out the FAFSA as well. We work hand in hand with Tasha, I can tell you so much, and a lot of other community partners about making them aware of housing resources, information about transportation, and then also we want to respect their privacy and their rights and when they are in school. And a number of our unaccompanied youth, they're not in their homes for various reasons. It could be because it's unsafe, it's not a good living environment, there's legal issues, there's criminal issues, they could have been kicked out for being who they are. Student data management system. So again, we're protecting their rights and their privacy as well. Next slide. Common themes of our UI students. I see there on the screen, not feeling safe, environment, parent incarceration, addiction, conflict, so they're being kicked out of the house. Parents have moved away or been deported. So I'm going to find some family and friends who will do that, who will take in our kids.
Yeah, you cut out quite a bit on that one, Tanisha, but I mean, I think just reading through this slide, you know, I just appreciate it because it really brings up so many reasons that people do not think of when they think about people experiencing homelessness. So I just appreciate that you have this up here and, you know, that the information is getting out there.
Absolutely, yeah. Our families experience homelessness. It looks very different.
Mm-hmm.
This next slide is, it doesn't matter why a student chose to leave home or why they're no longer living in their home. We still qualify them under McKinney-Vento and for the HOPE program. And a lot of times there's a lot of a deeper dive into the family dynamics and the situation as to why that student is no longer with their family. And next slide. So again, the services that both Amanda, myself, and Melissa and Mary, we provide is transportation to and from school, housing resources, health insurance, food stamp benefits, clothing and hygiene items, state ID identification, providing the FAFSA letters, obtaining help to obtain vital records, and then also under the HOPE program, McKinney-Vento, we waive all fines and fees for sports and extracurricular activities, and we also help our seniors with graduation activities as well too. Next slide. So again, we focusing also on foster care. Melissa is our foster care liaison. She works very closely with DCY and also the other foster care liaisons in the district as well. There are monthly regional meetings that take place, again, working with OSPI and other McKinney-Vento folks. So there's a lot of coordination and collaboration amongst all the school districts to serve our students here in Clark County. Next slide. And a lot of times with our foster care all the same rights as any other student. And we work with the FCRCs in each of our schools and our social workers as well. So the services that we provide for our foster care youth as well. Next slide. And this is just a slide showing who some of the district liaisons are across the Clark County and Vancouver, Evergreen, Battleground, and Camas as well. So like I said, each school district has a liaison, and I encourage everybody to go to their designated school district's website to learn more information. And with our HOPE program, there are some national organizations that we work closely with, Education of Homeless Children and Youth Guidance, the National Association for Education of Homeless Children and Youth, and then also the Schoolhouse Connection as well too.
Okay.
And so that is our presentation. Thank you so much, everybody, for your patience. And I am happy that we'll be sending out the presentation so that you can take a more closer look at the slides. And I'll put some links and some contact information in the chat as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tanisha. All right. And yeah, thanks for bearing with our technical difficulties, everybody. I appreciate it. I think we definitely, the slides were great and we got a good idea of what you were trying to get across. So appreciate it. Okay, so now I'd like to introduce my colleague at Council for the Homeless, Tasha Slater. Tasha, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, and I'm happy to be technical support if you need it as well. So you're welcome to share your screen, or I'm happy to share mine.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and share it?
Okay, yeah. I'll get the right one pulled up here. And here we go.
And I can introduce myself. So hello, everyone. I'm Tasha Slater. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the diversion manager at Council for the Homeless. You can go to the next slide. So Council for the Homeless has 3 McKinney-Vento school-based programs. One of the programs that I oversee is the Homeless Student Stability Program, also known as HSSP. We work with Vancouver and Evergreen Public Schools to provide wraparound services with school staff. And those staff are able to refer students and their families to HSSP through a referral process. And it gives them the direct access into our coordinated entry. This partnership has been really great and collaborative over the last several years and has made us have a really strong relationship so that we can serve students. This school year, the 2021-2022 school year, we have enrolled and exited 39 households. And of those 39 households, 26 of them started as couching or doubled up, which is about 66%. Next slide. So for HSSP and other McKinney-Vento programs, we use a diversion approach. Diversion does not involve extensive case management. Instead, diversion initiates problem-solving conversations with students and their families. While working together, staff share their knowledge of local housing resources and encourage families to think about their own creative ideas for stabilizing their housing. At Council for the Homeless, the staff work with the school-based programs to meet the households where they're at, making sure that they're being client-centered and strength-based. This includes listening to the household's needs, recognizing that the household and the student are experts in their lives, and letting them guide the conversation. This approach builds trusting relationships with students and families, and it leads to better communication and problem solving. When funding is available, we have flex funds for these programs that are typically used to cover upfront move-in expenses like first and last month's rent, security deposit, utility activation, anything that's beyond the family's existing financial means. In some cases, we're able to pay for housing debt, or flex funds can pay for things like bus passes, car repairs, or furniture from our local furniture bank, really anything that helps maintain the income that the family needs to move into housing. Staff are also able to help navigate other barriers to housing, such as low credit score, previous eviction, charges on the record, anything that kind of prevents them from being able to get into a rental. So when using the diversion approach, we know it's effective for McKinney-Vento households. Of those 39 households this year that we've enrolled and exited, 36 of them have increased stability, housing stability, which is about 92.3%. With Evergreen School District, we have enrolled 20 households, and of those 20, 19 have stabilized their housing, meaning that when they enrolled, they exited in a position that allowed them to not qualify for McKinney-Vento services anymore. So because of the effectiveness of these programs, Council for the Homeless has been able to gauge the need in the community for households in doubled up situations. We found that being doubled up disproportionately impacts BIPOC-led households and the people they're staying with. Being able to serve these McKinney-Vento households continues to prevent homelessness for those doubled up, as well as the households who are at risk for letting them stay in their homes with them. Because of the success of these McKinney-Vento programs and the expanded definition from HUD's definition, we continue to apply for more contracts, and that will allow us to serve these doubled up populations. And I know we're getting a little bit short on time, so I think that I can kind of just end it there, and then we can answer any questions that you might have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tasha. All right, I'm gonna go back to sharing my screen. I can get to the right spot. And we do have maybe just a couple minutes for some Q&A. So if anybody has questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And then I also have a question that I'll ask you as we wrap up our night together. So let's see. Get myself to the right spot here. All right. Oh, there we go. Well, I'll get us there. All right, there. We got to have our slide, you know? So let's see. Do we have anything popping up in the chat? Let's see. I see a question for Tasha. From Mark. Okay, yes. Thank you, Mark.
I can put my email in the chat, and then you can connect Tiffany and I.
All right. Well, I'll move it along because we only have a few minutes left. But again, if anyone's got any burning questions, please do post them in the chat. So I wondered for both of you, you know, why do you think our system is set up in a way that gives service providers a bit more freedom when it comes to school children experiencing homelessness? And what can we learn about serving folks in a more equitable way from McKinney-Vento?
I can go. So I think our school-based programs have continued to see students experiencing homelessness impacting their abilities to go to school and really their schooling in all aspects. Allowing for the programs to provide housing stability for students has a positive impact overall. I think we've seen that students that experience homelessness as children also we see them at a higher chance of experiencing homelessness as adults. And so having this expanded definition, and I think Laura, you said it in one of your slides that that households that are in the doubled up situations still have the similar outcomes as those that are experiencing homelessness by HUD's definition. And so I think it's important to make sure that we are providing programs for students since we see that data is there.
Yeah, thank you.
And I would agree with you with Tasha saying, I think under McKinney-Vento, it just allows us to do more things, having us advocates in the schools, working with staff and teachers and the counselors, just having a presence, and more people knowing about our HOPE program and the McKinney-Vento liaisons helps to, kind of start to get rid of that stigma of what people think families are who are homeless, or the reasons why they're homeless, because it's every reason possible. And the families knowing that there are people here to help them and not to judge them or shame them, it allows us to provide more assistance and know who our families are.
Yeah, what I really hear there is just that sort of individualized approach and lack of stigma, or trying to reduce that stigma, lack of sort of blame, if you will, for the reasons a family or a student may be homeless, that maybe we're not as generous with adults who are experiencing homelessness. Okay, I see a question about supports for pre-K families. So do we know of anything beyond, what we can do for like K through 12 in the community? And that would apply to all the school districts, in Clark County.
I can't speak for the other school districts because I don't know how their pre-K programs work with them. I know here in Vancouver, on our housing questionnaires that we have families fill out, we do ask them if they have any children in kindergarten or younger too, so we can help identify those families that have pre-K children in the home too. We can probably look into ESD 112 to see if they have some individual programs too, because we know that a lot of our families, kids who are 3 or 4 years old, they don't have older siblings. And so we necessarily would not identify them right away until they enter into our programs or they enroll in our preschool, early childhood education programs too.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I just wanted to acknowledge that it is now 6:30, so we have had our hour together. So I'm hopeful that you all are willing to spend maybe another 5 minutes with us tonight. And thank you to those of you who do. I do want to just address one question in the chat. Diana asked, are there measures in the education system that work outside of the HUD definition, i.e. prevention? And I think it's a great question, Diana, and definitely one that I want to just touch on, because I think that's the goal of this webinar tonight, is to really just make that distinction between the HUD definition of being literally homeless and how that kind of impacts our ability to provide services to adults in our community, and then the McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness, which does kind of fall more into that prevention mode. So therefore, things like allowing eligibility when students are doubled up in couch surfing, and maybe staying in a motel with their own funds that are only going to last for a few more days, let's say, or just reducing those barriers to access to services like immediate producing records and immunization records, and all the things that adults experiencing homelessness are faced with that are barriers to getting stably housed again. It seems like with McKinney-Vento, our system has it set up in a way that kind of removes a lot of those barriers in the name of helping students. And so not to say that it's not necessary, and funds are always an issue. So there are reasons for requiring things like being literally homeless to serve folks. And we know that in our BIPOC community, people of color, they experience homelessness in a way that is much more accessible to services, which makes it actually more equitable, if they have students in school. So, all right. Well, I know we could talk a lot about this. Yes, Tanisha.
just want to say for those who are, are in the Vancouver School District, one thing that we do in terms of our equity piece, and that's a whole other conversation too, is that all of our HOPE documents and literature and forms are available in English, Spanish, Russian, and Czechese. And we work very closely with all our interpreters in our school district and doing that outreach to our families.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. That is great. All right, I think in the name of moving us along, I will go ahead and move forward with our call to action. Those of you who attend our webinars are familiar with this piece of our evening together. So hopefully tonight you leave with a little bit better understanding of how federal policy evolves and advocacy plays into that, and how that policy and funding impacts service delivery, and how those impacts are felt differently for adults and children experiencing homelessness. If you haven't already, please do sign up for our e-newsletter and our advocacy, or our housing advocacy email list. We do participate in advocacy throughout the year, most intensely during the state legislative session, but really throughout the year. Hopefully you learned something tonight, so please share what you learned, share the data, share the facts, and dispel the myths and reduce the stigmas of homelessness. And remember that even as we work to house people every day, people like Tanisha and Tasha and the folks who provide services throughout our continuum of care in Clark County, more people fall into homelessness, and that really is the issue. You can house people more than ever before, but when more people than ever before are falling into homelessness, it just creates a really desperate situation. So keep in mind these families with kids, these thousands of school-age children in our community who struggle with homelessness. People have a very specific idea when they think about someone who is homeless, but the reality is there are also families with children. We do have a community of hardworking professionals out there. You've heard from a couple today, and you've seen the names of others who are doing the work. And we can't forget that homelessness touches all parts of our community and people of all ages, race, ability, and gender. And last but definitely not least, be kind to those that you see who are living outside on the streets, in shelters, and in cars. That kindness really does go a long way. And I do want to invite you to our webinar. We will have a webinar in May. We're going to be reporting out on the 2021 Homeless Crisis Response System numbers. So stay tuned to all of our communications channels. We'll be posting the information about that and the date and how to register in the coming days. But thank you to all of you who have joined us tonight. Thank you to our amazing guests tonight. I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and expertise with all of us. Thank you to Shavona for helping with the chat. It's hard for me to do that and do the presentation. So I just really appreciate everyone who's attended tonight as well. So we'll see you next month, and I hope you have a great evening. Take care, everybody.